And welcome everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Schreiber-Pan, for coming and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us this evening. We can't wait to learn from you. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you right now.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and screen share now. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's so great to be invited to speak on this passion of mine, which is marrying the two concepts, nature and mental health. And part of my story is that I actually got my PhD at Loyola University in counseling and clinical mental health. And my dissertation research actually looked at the role of nature in mental health and resiliency and spirituality. So I spent many years researching the topic. And then as I founded the Chesapeake Mental Health and also the new branch of it, which is called the Center for Nature Informed Therapy, bringing sort of that research to create evidence-based understanding of how nature and human mental health kind of interact. So I'm going to keep going here, and we're going to start with a little disclaimer, and it is the acknowledgement of our privilege as benefactors of the colonization of the U.S. We acknowledge our social location and privilege. So I just want to throw it out there that we recognize that we live, work, and play on the traditional lands of the Piscataway, Nanticoke, and Susquehannock, and it's important for us to honor this reality. And one of the reasons we start all of our nature-informed therapy sessions or workshops or seminars with this disclaimer is because we want to acknowledge that the land itself has also had its own share of trauma. Because as a trauma-informed clinician, what we do is we acknowledge and honor that trauma has influenced who we are as people. And as an effort to connect people back to their original deep connection with nature, we have to acknowledge that, that the land has had its own history and things have happened to the land that could be seen as traumatic. And so we have a disclaimer. Okay, so what are we all about? So you learned a little bit about me, but really the question that often comes up to sort of start this conversation is, how does nature support your mental health? So how does nature support your mental health? So you want to just put some of that in the chat, because I'm curious to see how nature supports your mental health. And while you do that, we're going to keep going here because I want to talk to you a little bit about this idea of nature-informed therapy. And the idea is that direct contact with nature brings about the ability to touch our own inner nature. So you might have been familiar with John Muir, who said, "I only went out for a walk and finally concluded to stay out till sundown, for going out, I found, was really going in." And so what John Muir really talked about at that time was what he realized was when he was outdoors in these natural environments, that there was a natural reflective quality and sort of this benefit to our mental health when we spend time outdoors. So why is it necessary that we talk about nature and mental health? Well, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, by 2050, we have 75% of the world's population is going to be living in cities. We're also predicting that by 2050, 93% of our time will be spent indoors. And that estimation is about 10 hours a day will be spent on screens. So that's the reason it's necessary. But we also want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to have nature inform mental health. Well, it's not just using nature as a resource, yet joining nature in a healing reciprocal relationship. The decline in mental health is related to human disconnect from the natural world, similar to the often neglected effects of family estrangement. So what we have found is, and I want to give you this idea of, okay, I feel stressed out. All right. And so I decide that I'm going to do something to help myself with my stress. So I think about what has helped me in the past, and I decide I'm going to go out for a walk. So I go out for a walk, and when I return, maybe an hour later, I feel better, right? And that's really our entry level, or let's call it ecotherapy level 1, introduction to how nature and mental health kind of coexist. But what we have found is that that's not really sustainable, right? Because at some point you're going to feel stressed out again. So to get to some of the roots of why you're stressed, right? This is where we're entering the realm of ecotherapy level 2. And ecotherapy level 2 looks more at how our relationship with the natural world has become estranged, how there has been a disconnect from our original home, which was the natural world, and how that disconnect, that estrangement, actually contributes to mental health issues. Okay, so why integrate nature into mental health? First of all, it's evidence-based, and there's lots and lots of support. And even if you're, not into reading up on all these statistical studies, you even know this, right? You know that there's this correlation for you, that when you do nature engagement, that your mental health benefits from it. But not only that, we have data, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Brownie, that there's data is supporting our work, right? And what we find in the nature mental health field is we have so much data, we have so much evidence to support that. And I'm going to get to that in a second. So deeper ecotherapy, we talked about level 1, there's this human-centered nature therapy. I'm going to go to nature and benefit from its healing powers. Level 2 is there needs to be healing because there can be no true human health on a sick planet. So as long as the planet suffers and there's destruction of the planet, I'm going to have suffering included in that. So the core beliefs that we hold in the field of nature and from mental health is that disconnection from nature is a fundamental contributor to mental and physical health problems for everyone. And that reconciliation therapy is necessary to address the human nature estrangement. So anytime I can, as a mental health professional, help heal the estranged relationship between a person and nature, it's going to benefit their mental health. And then also one of our core beliefs is that at a time when the destruction of our home planet is the most significant issue facing humanity today, reconciliation will result in a deeper level of caring for nature and greater conservation involvement. And just to help you understand where we came with this core belief is that when someone is really struggling with a mental health issue, let's say anxiety or depression, it takes up their entire ability to function. It basically fills their entire body and brain, right? And if someone is caught up with anxiety and depression, it's unlikely that they're able to care for the planet, right? So by helping people manage their mental health and start reconciling their relationship with the natural world, it translates into their ability and their motivation to care for our planet. Because we are nature, everybody can benefit from including nature in their mental health. So our work is repairing a bond. Our job is to help reconnect people, and we slowly introduce people in manageable ways. Now, my story of nature starts and ends with a family that was very engaged in the natural world. With hiking, my dad is a mountaineer, so I was introduced to nature in a perhaps very different way than some other people do. And so I can't assume that hiking a mountain is going to be the right way for you to engage with nature, because your story might be completely different. So what we do is we try to introduce people in manageable ways. Now, there are a group of people that might feel very afraid of going on a hike in a natural trail in a kind of suburban environment for whatever reasons. And so what we always do is we look for the thread back to nature. We all have a thread. It could be that your grandfather went fishing with you. It could be that you feel calm around water, right? It could be that you enjoy watching the birds on the bird feeder. So we all have a thread. And so what we do is look for that thread and then make it a whole web that connects you back to the natural world. Using nature to help regulate our clients, facilitator needs to first regulate themselves. And this is a big one that we're going to talk about, which is that nature has this very interesting quality of having a strong effect on your nervous system. So our nervous system, we have a fight, a flight, a freeze response. And most of our people that have stress and anxiety, they have a nervous system that is hyperactive. So they're always on the lookout for the next threat. They're hypervigilant. They're caught up in what to do next. They feel stressed out. And so what nature does, it helps regulate that nervous system so that people feel more regulated, more calm. They're able to breathe deeper. And that's how nature becomes a co-therapist for us, because it's already doing its work by helping work on that nervous system to calm people down, so they're not in that fight or flight response. So let's talk a little bit about the scholarly underpinnings of nature-informed therapy. And they're really sort of these four components. It's psychoevolutionary story, attention restoration therapy, and then attachment and psychospiritual. So for psychoevolutionary, humans have been shaped by the forces of evolution. Okay, so I would love for us to be in person because I could demonstrate by this really long timeline that I usually bring with me. But I want you to imagine that 2.5 million years we have spent evolving in the natural world, okay? Which means that our physiology, including our brain, is adapted to the natural environment. Our senses are adapted to interpret information from plants and streams, not so much from traffic and high rises. So biophilia is really this human innate wiring to be fascinated and drawn to nature, right? And interact with other life forms. So 2.5 million years ago, this epic time story starts of the human being. We evolve outside, and it's only in the last 200 years a big shift happened for the Homo sapien. 200 years ago, we started spending most of our waking hours and sleeping hours indoors. Okay, and that is the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So the Homo sapien that spent all this time in evolution outdoors, we are born from nature, all of a sudden decides that we're going to be moving indoors. There are severe repercussions of taking a body and a brain that has evolved outdoors and putting it indoors, where all of a sudden we are in a completely different environment, right? We're in concrete buildings. We're not hearing the sounds that we're used to, that our brain is used to hearing outdoors. And so really we have to understand our story doesn't start in 2021. The human story starts 2.5 million years ago, and it's only the last % of that we've been indoors. And our body and our brain has not adjusted to that yet. And that is why we mental health professionals are seeing a whole different pandemic, the epidemic of mental health issues. Okay. And so what we have to understand is the Homo sapien being in nature is a homecoming. Okay, is a homecoming. So in 1999, we had researchers that really specialized in this, and they looked at the stress reducing effects of nature are really a matter of unconscious processes. So we're not conscious of what all works on our body and our brain when we're outdoors, but everything is working on your body and your brain to have these stress reducing effects. And if I had like more time, like a week with you guys, I could talk to you about exactly what happens in your physiology when you're outdoors that actually reduces your stress, you know? Okay, so many scholars accept the evidence presented by paleontologists that Homo sapiens' primarily habitat was on savannas in proximity of water, right? So I just want you to imagine that during hunting and gathering, 90% of our brain evolved. So what did our world look like during hunting and gathering? Well, first of all, we lived outdoors 100% of the time. We lived in areas where there was proximity of water because water meant life. Therefore, when we humans hear the sound of water, it is one of the 3 profound sounds that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is actually the nervous system that is the rest and relaxation. In case you're interested in the 2 other sounds, it is birdsong and wind. So water, birdsong, and wind, those 3 sounds have the strongest effect on your rest and relaxation response. We know this. We sell CDs with those sounds on it, right? We're drawn to being near and around water. And that is because we have evolved to see water as life, a source of life. They proposed that the safe oasis, which signals safety and restoration, was surrounded by grasslands and large old trees. So home, if you want to think of the Homo sapiens home, was located in protecting green surroundings that commanded a view of water and surrounding terrains, forested and open fields. So humans have been shaped by these forces of evolution. And we know that the oldest emotion-driven part of the brain are still affected by that today. So our bodies relax in pleasant and natural environments. So forest therapy, right, is this idea that we take this body and this brain into forest environments. And what the forest therapy kind of field looked like is what happens to the body. What are some things that happens to the body after just 2 hours of spending time in the forest setting? And some of these results are really incredible. It's just after 2 hours, we see a reduction in blood pressure, lowering of cortisol and adrenaline, which are the hormones that get released when you're in fight or flight, right? When your brain detects a threat. Now, just a side note on the brain detecting stress. We were designed to react to stress, to a threat in our environment. So for example, if a tiger walked into your room, you're going to have a natural firing up of that fight or flight response. And there's going to be cortisol and adrenaline released into your body. And you're going to be super fast and powerful because everything in your body is trying to help you survive that moment. Okay. But now in 2021, there are not a whole lot of tigers running after you. And what the brain has done instead, it sees traffic, deadlines, family conflict as tigers. Okay. And so a lot of us are in chronic fight or flight because we now can't turn it off anymore. It's always around us, right? Now, remember when I said there's these 3 sounds that you have this pleasant experience with? Well, unfortunately, they also found sounds that have the opposite effect. So for example, traffic. When your ear detects the sound of traffic, it actually starts activating your sympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that tells you that there might be a threat in your environment and you better be ready, right? Well, traffic, human voices fighting, the sound of sirens, right? All activating that sympathetic nervous system. And so we have to understand that we have created a world, a modern day life, okay, where we're constantly being bombarded with stimuli that is activating our fight or flight response. Even if you live in the countryside and you don't have traffic, the sound of traffic, chances are you're still a working human being that is on the computer and is problem solving. Problem solving in the brain is seen as a threat if you don't get that problem solved. So if any of you wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning and your brain goes, well, I'm glad you're awake because we've got problems to solve. Let's get going. And you think, wait, it's 2 in the morning. I really want to be sleeping. But your brain can't turn it off because an unsolved problem is seen as a threat. Now, back in hunting and gathering days, it was a very different experience because we had that restorative environment around us. And we were so tuned into the seasons and the daylight that we would go to bed when the sun would go down, right? And we would be in community. And there would be some people that would surround us to keep us safe, or maybe keep a lookout. It's all very different today, right? We're bombarded. There's that prefrontal cortex that's constantly on to problem solve. And then don't get me started on the news, because the news is designed to appeal to that part of the brain that says there are threats and I need to be afraid, right? And that's what makes the news, or things that tell you to be afraid. Okay, so but 2 hours in this environment, we see all these changes. The pulse rate goes down, you know, all this good stuff. I want to talk to you a little bit about sensory amnesia. Sensory amnesia and eco-boredom. So what our understanding is that our ancestors, our hunting and gathering ancestors, actually had 30 or more senses. They were so fine-tuned at the time, right? So by us, and we see this still today in some tribal or indigenous communities, they seem to have a much more fine-tuned sensory system than what we do today. And what our understanding of that is as the Homo sapiens started moving indoors, we had a gradual loss of sensory experience. There was a gradual loss of sensory experience because we just didn't need it as much anymore, because we were in indoor environments. And so we just didn't need to know the sort of tease apart certain sounds and smells and things like that. So this lack of sensory stimulation from rich and diverse ecosystem and life forms that our nervous system evolved in, right? So just the sound of birds and crickets, or temperature change, or the cucumber scent of a copperhead, right? Or the stillness of the wind before a storm. Our hunting and gathering ancestors were so tuned into that. And there's been this gradual loss, right? Now, when we have a deeper development of our interaction with the environment, we see that some sensory information is starting to come back. Now, the sort of spiritual boredom or lack of experience of awe and wonder is similarly related. So I want to give you an example. If you're in the store and you're in line at the grocery store, and you see that people pull out their phones while they're waiting in line, right? This is an example that tells us that the brain has developed a addiction, a hunger for fast stimulation, right? It's not able to tolerate boredom any longer. It wants quick, fast information, and we get sort of addicted to it. And so we're standing there in line and we just grab that phone and we just randomly scroll through it because the brain wants fast information. Nature works on a very different scale. There's a different pace in nature. And we have to remember that we evolved to interact with the world at the pace of life, not at light. So when we're computer, that moves at the speed of light, right? But that is not how we evolved. We evolved to be moving at the speed of life, as life moves about us. So attention restoration is that we are in a modern day environment that is asking our brain to work so hard because we're constantly firing up that prefrontal cortex, your problem solving part of the brain, executive work, right? We read, we write, we're problem solving, right? We're analyzing, and that leads to mental fatigue. So mental fatigue and concentration, though, can improve by time spent in or looking at nature, right? And this is what we found with many replications of studies that were done in attention restoration theory. So what we find is there's a renewal of attention. So I want you to think of nature as being this ability to rest an overused muscle. And the overused muscle is your prefrontal cortex. That is your executive part of the brain, right? After mental exertion, we see this renewal that occurs. And that is true for people experiencing stress. And even what we see is that it can help with the mental exertion for people with ADHD. But it's kind of funny how this was tested. One study that there was a lot of studies that looked like this, but they would have a person experience stress. Okay, so one way they would do that is they would make people do math problems that were unsolvable. And then there would be a person standing there saying, I can't believe you can't do this math problem. It's really easy. So I would be totally stressed out. I'm like, oh my gosh, right? And so then they would measure how your nervous system would react by firing up your fight or flight response. And then what they would do is they wanted to see how long it would take your brain to get back to baseline, meaning coming down from that fight or flight and just surfing right there on your baseline, right? Where you're not stressed out, you're calm. And then what they did is they had people stressed out from the math problem, and then they would have them view imagery of lands, of landscapes, flowers, that kind of thing. Or they were viewing images from like a street cafe, or kind of walking around in a more urban environment. And they found a significant difference in the speed of the brain being able to experience the renewal of attention. Basically getting back to baseline was much, much quicker for the group that was viewing the nature slides. And so that's when we first stumbled on this ability of the brain to really recover when we're exposed to the natural environment. So the mental fatigue, right, or constant daily treadmill of tasks is wearing out the frontal lobe. So the brain resting, soft fascination, is really interesting as we see this in restorative environments. So soft fascination is this really interesting thing that happens in the brain when we are alert, but also relaxed at the same time. And we see the brain doing what we call soft fascination when we are in natural environments or looking at slides of natural environments. So soft fascinating stimuli, right? So I want you to look at this slide because this is kind of showing you what we're asking the brain to do in this situation. So at the top left is my son. He's fishing when we were backcountry in Wyoming, and we have not had traffic or modern day life in a week. So we're about 5 days in to a backpacking trip. And I want you to think of what are we asking the brain to figure out here, right? What is the brain trying to analyze here? Versus the bottom, which is sort of a modern day office environment. We've got a lot of multitasking going on. There's socializing, problem solving. There's all kinds of different stimuli happening. And what we know about the brain is when there's an environment with fewer choices, okay, a lot of filtering is happening in that office environment. But the fewer choices at the top left really is when we're seeing that this sort of restorative environment for the brain. So the attentional system of the brain functions better for higher order things. So stress is often associated with mental fatigue because in essence, really, in other words, is the bottom right, we're asking a machine to run way too many problems at the same time. And that stresses out the entire system. We cannot multitask, people, not us women either. That is a myth. We cannot multitask. You think you can, but what the cost of that is that you are stressing your nervous system and you're activating your fight or flight response. Okay. All right. So when we're talking about using all of our senses, it's really fascinating because when we're in natural environments, we see that our sense of sight is really, we see a lot of green and blue colors have effect of the brain. Same with fractals, right? So let's go through this really quickly. The color green, for example, is in the middle of the spectrum, right? That resides the color green. It's about 555 nanometers, but really what that means is it's at the center of the spectrum, so we know our eyes experience a lot less strain. We also know that there are a lot of fractals that occur in nature, like we see these repeating patterns, right? Like in a fern. And when we are exposed to fractals, we see that a reduction of a stress level up to 60%. So that's just your sense of seeing. You know, let's go with smell, one of my favorites. The sense of smell. The forest is really nature's aromatherapy. These airborne chemicals that plants give off to protect from insects actually have an effect on that rest and relaxation nervous system part. Cedar, pine, Douglas fir, and spruce all have these chemicals. And when we breathe them in, our parasympathetic nervous system gets activated, which is your rest and relaxation response. Seeing, smelling, hearing. Okay, we talked about it. We talked about how there are these three special sounds. What about sense of touch and taste, right? We know that direct contact with the earth, some people call it earthing, but that it leads to better sleep and reduction in pain because the inflammation can go away from that sort of, has to do with an ionic exchange that happens between the human body, has a different electrical charge than the ground. And when we're barefoot or have direct contact with that, there's a natural exchange that happens. A habitually poor diet, right? Western processed food is also independently associated with greater risk for depression and anxiety. So we have a direct correlation between the food that you eat and your mental health. There's a gut connection between your gut and your brain. And what, again, we find nature foods, berries, things that are grown, your greens and your fruits, have a strong effect on your mental health. And then the psychospiritual piece, right? Feeling awe during nature experiences has the singular ability to lower stress and improve overall well-being. And that's really fascinating because when we're looking at awe, the experience of awe, the more people feel and experience awe, the stronger there's a correlation with mental health. So awe is a feeling of wonder and amazement at being in the presence of something vast that transcends our current understanding. There's a whole system at UC Berkeley devoted to understanding the scientific study of awe. I do a whole talk on just awe. But awe is really important because what we see is when people experience more awe, it activates regions in the brain that have to do with pro-social behavior. It makes people more kind. It makes people feel more connected to others in a good way, the more we experience awe. And don't we all need more kindness in this world, right? And you don't have to be at the Grand Canyon to experience awe. You can have eyes of wonder as you move through your backyard, and you're going to experience awe, okay? As you watch the bees, as you watch the birds, right? And I happen to love those cicadas, and I'm sad to see them go because they did inspire awe in me. Just like, how do you guys count to 17 underground? I'm amazed by this. I love this slide that says, there is no Wi-Fi in the forest, but I promise you will find better connection. Connection, attachment, and relationships are really the cornerstone of human flourishing. So one of the things that happen from, and this is also really important to remember when we're thinking of children and mental health, right, is that there's a repercussion to mental health when we see eco-separation. So what are the consequences of living insulated from the natural world? Because we're really insulated, right? Spend most of our time indoors. To live in concrete homes with artificial light and eat manufactured food, you know, that's bought at the store, We wear shoes that insulate us from the ionic energy exchange offered from the earth. We don't inhale the phytoncides emitted from trees and plants. So we're really seeing this eco-separation having a profound effect on our health, mental and physical health. So species loneliness is the modern disconnection from interacting and interliving with a variety of species from the living earth. So species loneliness is this idea that our hunting and gathering ancestors had a much more diverse relationship with many different species, okay? The modern day human being has very few interactions with the more than human world, okay? So we might have a dog, right? That would be one way to have a more than human species interaction. But our hunting and gathering ancestors had a much more intricate connection with all different species. And so what we find is what we like to call species loneliness. It's really this human sadness and grief from the estrangement from the more than human world. That is why we are so excited when we see wildlife, right? Oh my goodness, like look at this bird, or I think I saw a coyote, right? It's that there's more than me. And species loneliness leads us into this understanding that we are really disconnected from the chain, from the web, right? That we are not the ultimate center of the universe. We're just one part of a big ecosystem. And if we take ourselves out of that web, then we experience what we call species loneliness. Domestication is this idea that we're really a domesticated version of our wild ancestors, the wild hunter, the wild gatherer, right? That would step in, it would take risks, it would explore the frontiers. We are the domesticated version of that. Just like your dog is a domesticated version of the wolf, so are we. And there are also repercussions of a domesticated human being. And one of those is that we are addicted to comfort. It has to be 72 degrees at all times. I can't be any mosquitoes out there, you know? So we are addicted to comfort. And in my opinion, in my work, that translates into our inability to tolerate distress. External and internal, right? People can't cope anymore. They can't cope with feelings anymore because we never learn how to cope with external discomfort. So a lot of my work is helping people lean into discomfort, right? Because when we can learn how to be with discomfort, the cold, the rain, whatever it is, right? Outdoors, it translates into resiliency inside of us. Place blindness is this idea that a not knowing, not understanding, or perceiving a felt sense of the natural world. So it is said that the youth of today can easily identify 5 different computer programming languages, but they can't name the names of the trees in their own backyard, right? It's like attending a party and not knowing anyone there. And so it's that place blindness is forgetting who we are in this continuum. So I'm going to stop the screen share here because I really want to just check in with thoughts, comments, questions that come up for you from any of the things that I've said, or how you see that mental health piece come together for you.
Does it, if you want, we're a small intimate group, so you can raise your hand, unmute, to ask Heidi a question or to provide feedback. I have something. You talk about the prefrontal cortex resting. I mean, how does that differ in kids where they don't really have a fully developed prefrontal cortex? Is it
Right.
help to develop it, or?
Yeah. No, so that's a good question, because what we see, and so it's funny because the child and adolescent brain is a prefrontal cortex under construction. So there is, we used to think that irrational behavior by teens is caused by hormones. But we have a better understanding that it's actually that prefrontal cortex is under construction. And when they're acting out and they are not using their judgment, it's because that part of the brain is just not fully formed yet, right? But what we know is that the natural world can help ground and regulate that, right? So if they are, because they can't really regulate themselves yet. So the natural world and having a deep connection with the natural world can help children actually ground, and it helps them regulate because it affects their nervous system, right? So if they're sitting in front of the computer and they're doing video games and things like that, how is that child going to self-regulate? Well, it can take a few deep breaths, right? But what we find is if a child can be outdoors and it can put their hand in the dirt and throw things in the water, or they can befriend a tree, all of a sudden there's a more natural way of regulating that nervous system. Now, it starts with helping the parents. It's helping the parents create outdoor time for their children, right? So, you know, if a parent says, hey, I'm too busy, go outside and play, that's what I did when I was a kid, that no longer really translates to this generation, because we've built a culture of fear. And so a lot of times, you know, we're afraid to let our kids play outside because something could happen. So we have to think of it differently, right? We have to be intentional about family outings taking place outdoors. We have to be intentional about the language we use referring to nature. If we're scared and there's gross things out there, your child is going to do that very same thing, right? It's not going to want to go out there. It's going to think things are not good out there. So it's really about the social learning theory, which is children's brains will imitate and mirror what it's seeing and the parents do. So it's really important that we help parents understand this is why this is important. You know, you get out there with your kids first.
Great. Any questions or comments for Heidi?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I know some people that what's a good word for, I guess scared, going like hiking, going on trails or being outside due to bugs or animals and things like that. And so that to them that seems stressful for them instead of calmness. So how do you reverse that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thank you for that. I noticed the sun is really shining in my my room here. I'm sorry. Well, at least you can hear my voice, I'm sure. So that was a great question. And when I started talking earlier about finding the thread back to nature, that's really where we want to start. We want to start with where the person's at, right? Just because hiking might be something restorative to you, it's not that for everyone. So if I have a person that I know gets scared about taking hikes, we don't really start there. We start with, you know, is there a natural place that you feel more connected or calm? So for example, at the Center for Nature Informed Therapy, we have partnerships with nature organizations that allow us to do our mental health work on their premises. And one is the Dew Gardens. And so we've had a lot of clients that will say, you know, the hiking thing, that's not for me, but if I could sit by the garden, by the flower, or just listen to the sound of the stream, that would actually make me feel really much more calm. And we would go out there, and that's how it starts, right? We sit there, we notice it, and we're starting a love affair, right? We're starting a love affair. So maybe down the road, they will be more willing to go to a trail, but we're going to start with just recovery and finding spaces that do feel restorative to them.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Welcome.
I was really taken by the fact that problem solving, our brains relate to those as a threat. I always thought that was kind of a a fun part. I mean, you know, work, you're trying to solve problems, is kind of a fun part of that's fun. But so that was interesting to me.
Yeah, and you just pay attention to your body the next time you're in that zone of problem solving, because there's adrenaline in your body when you're problem solving. And there's sort of this, it feels good, right? To get things done, to check things off the checklist. But adrenaline is a stress hormone. Okay.
Mhm.
So when you're then checked off your list, your body can get addicted to adrenaline. It wants to keep more that felt good sense of getting things done. So we just have to be aware that that is just how our brain functions, and then it's hard to turn it off.
Yeah. And it's very scary to think that by 2050, 10 hours a day is going to be on a screen.
Yes, yes, and the repercussions of that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Anybody have, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. If anybody else has any questions, I also want to mention that we at the Center for Nature Informed Therapy, we do a couple of fun things. We do a lot of events that integrate nature into mental health. We're doing a therapy on the water event in August, learning about the effects of water on the brain, and we're going to go canoeing. But, you know, we also do trainings for nature organizations that want to brush up on their mental health first aid, so that you as nature organizations know how to manage mental health emergencies, or just being prepared for that. So if that is something you're interested in, so check us out. I'm going to put the website in the chat, and would love to have you. We also have a newsletter. Yeah, so if you want to put in your email, or I think you're gonna, Brownie, you're gonna follow up on that if you want to be in that newsletter. But we do all things nature and mental health in all different ways and levels, and we would love to have you at one of our events, or just be in touch with us. We'd love to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I think that this is just that we're just scratching the surface here on this this subject, and I find it so fascinating. And just I mean, you started off by saying that you think that the decline in mental health that has a lot to do with our disconnect from nature. I know that there's probably not a way to quantify that, but it's a good way of perspective to kind of think about that, and to put nature and getting outside more up front in everything that we do.
Absolutely. And I think that as mental health becomes something that people are speaking more freely about, and as the stigma is disappearing around it, I think it's really important that we then include the conversation on the nature's role in mental health.
Absolutely. Any other questions for Heidi this evening? Because this won't be the last, and I do apologize again for all of the confusion about the logging on. I've my stress level went up a little bit, and got some tense emails from some people, but we're gonna go outside and look at something green after this.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay, well, it was so nice to be part of this. Thanks for having me, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Thank you, Heidi. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you again. And get outside.
Thank you. Bye.